I reject Claire Whitmore. The words had not been spoken yet, but somehow the entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath for them. The grand moon hall glittered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their golden light spilling across polished marble floors that reflected every movement like still water. Silver banners embroidered with the crest of the royal wolf hung from towering stone columns, and the scent of pine wood, candle wax, and expensive perfume drifted through the crowded chamber. Claire Whitmore stood near the back of the hall where shadows gathered between the pillars. That was where people expected her to stand. That was where she had learned to stand. Invisible, quiet, forgettable. Around her, noble families filled the rows of velvet seats reserved for the kingdom's most influential bloodlines. Laughter floated through the room like soft music. Crystal glasses chimed together. Elegant gowns shimmered beneath the lights. Every conversation seemed to circle back to one subject. Tonight Alpha King Lucien Ashford would choose. Tonight, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories would announce the woman destined to stand beside him. Claire lowered her eyes as two young noblewomen passed nearby. Their voices were soft, but not soft enough. I heard Lady Victoria already received a private invitation from the palace. Of course she did. Who else would he choose? A quiet laugh followed. Certainly not an Omega from a ruined family. Claire pretended not to hear. She had spent most of her life pretending. Pretending cruel words did not sting. Pretending whispers did not follow her into every room. Pretending that being overlooked hurt less each year. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her simple silver bracelet, the only thing her mother had left behind. The metal felt cool against her skin. Steady, familiar, real, unlike everything else in this room. A trumpet sounded from somewhere beyond the massive oak doors. Instantly conversation stopped. Every head turned. Every spine straightened. The shift was almost physical, like a gust of wind sweeping through a field of tall grass. Claire felt it too. The anticipation, the pressure, the electric current that seemed to hum beneath the marble itself. The doors opened. Silence fell. Alpha King Lucien Ashford entered the hall. Even from across the room, his presence seemed larger than the space around him. He moved with calm certainty, dressed in a black formal coat embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like moonlit frost. His dark hair brushed the collar of his coat, and his silver eyes swept across the hall with quiet authority. No one spoke. No one dared. Claire had seen portraits before. None of them had captured the strange stillness surrounding him. He looked less like a king attending a ceremony and more like a force of nature walking through a room full of ordinary people. The nobles bowed. The court officials lowered their heads. Even the music seemed afraid to continue. Lucien ascended the marble platform at the center of the hall. Behind him stood elders, advisors, and members of the royal council. Their expressions were solemn, expectant, as though history itself had arrived to witness the evening. Claire should have been watching like everyone else. Instead, she found herself studying the floor. The reflections in the marble shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Beautiful, distant, safe, because the moment she looked up, she would have to remember something she worked very hard to forget. Hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope convinced people to dream beyond their station. Hope whispered impossible things in the dark. Hope told forgotten girls that perhaps this time would be different. Claire knew better. She lifted her chin anyway. Across the hall, for the briefest second, the Alpha King's silver eyes seemed to pause. Not on Victoria, not on the council, not on the nobles competing for his attention. On her. Claire's breath caught, just for a heartbeat. Then the moment vanished. The king continued scanning the crowd as if nothing had happened, as if she had imagined it entirely. Yet something deep inside her stirred. Not fear, not excitement, something stranger, like the first distant rumble before a storm no one else could hear. And somewhere beyond the glittering lights, beyond the smiling nobles and whispered predictions, destiny quietly began to change its course. Claire had learned long ago that people rarely remembered the exact moment they decided someone was worthless. They remembered the result. The whispers, the sideways glances, the invitations that never arrived, the doors that somehow closed just before you reached them. Standing beneath the glow of the chandeliers, she felt those memories gathering around her like familiar ghosts. A burst of laughter echoed from a nearby circle of nobles. Claire recognized several of them. She always did. People assumed an overlooked woman never noticed anything. In truth, she noticed everything. She noticed which families suddenly became polite when powerful guests approached. She noticed who smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. She noticed how quickly kindness disappeared when there was nothing to gain from it. Her family had learned that lesson years ago. Once, the Whitmore name had carried weight throughout the Northern Territories. Her grandfather had served as a trusted advisor to the crown. Their estate had hosted festivals, charitable gatherings, and winter celebrations attended by influential families from across the kingdom. Then came one bad harvest. Then another. Business partners disappeared. Friends became strangers. Promises faded. Within a few years, the Whitmores had become a cautionary tale people shared over dinner. Claire remembered watching it happen from the window of their old carriage as creditors hauled away furniture her mother loved. She remembered her father standing a little straighter every time someone tried to humiliate him. Most of all, she remembered her mother's final lesson. Never let bitterness become your identity. The memory settled warmly inside her chest. Her mother had not been strong in the way the kingdom admired. She had not commanded armies or possessed extraordinary gifts. Yet somehow she had made every room feel calmer when she entered it. Even now, years later, Claire still carried pieces of that quiet strength. A movement near the front of the hall drew her attention. Lady Victoria Ashcombe stood surrounded by admirers. Her gown sparkled with tiny crystals that caught the candlelight like falling stars. Confident laughter followed her wherever she moved. Many believed she would become queen before the night ended. Looking at her, Claire understood why. Victoria belonged here. She knew exactly where to stand, exactly how to smile, exactly how to make every conversation orbit around her. Claire felt no jealousy, only distance. They lived in the same kingdom, but existed in entirely different worlds. As musicians began playing a soft melody from the upper balcony, guests resumed speaking in careful voices. Yet beneath the surface, tension lingered. Everyone was waiting. Every glance toward the royal platform carried expectation. Every smile concealed ambition. Claire shifted slightly beside the pillar. Her bracelet brushed against her wrist. Suddenly, a strange warmth pulsed through the silver links. She frowned. The sensation vanished almost immediately. Perhaps it was her imagination. The hall was crowded. The air felt heavy. Even so, she glanced down. For an instant, she thought she saw a faint shimmer move across the bracelet's surface before disappearing beneath the candlelight. Her pulse quickened. The bracelet had belonged to her mother. It had never done anything unusual before. Claire touched it gently. Cool metal met her fingertips. Nothing more. Still, an uneasy feeling settled over her. Not fear. Anticipation. As though invisible threads were quietly pulling events toward a destination only fate could see. Across the hall, Alpha King Lucien Ashford rose from his seat. Conversations stopped once again. The musicians lowered their instruments. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the platform. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble. Whatever happened next would change someone's life forever. She simply never imagined destiny might already be walking toward her. The silence that settled over the Grand Moon Hall felt different now. It no longer carried excitement alone. It carried expectation. Claire watched as servants moved quietly along the edges of the chamber, adjusting silver candelabras and refreshing crystal glasses that no one seemed interested in touching anymore. Every gaze remained fixed on the royal platform. Yet while the kingdom waited for a decision, Claire found herself distracted by a memory she had spent years trying to understand. When she was 8 years old, she had wandered into the attic of the Whitmore estate during a summer storm. Rain had rattled against the roof while dust drifted through narrow beams of sunlight. Hidden behind old trunks and forgotten furniture, she had discovered a wooden chest bound with tarnished silver. Inside were letters, faded sketches, and a small leather journal written in a hand she did not recognize. She had only managed to read a few pages before her mother gently took the journal away. Claire still remembered the unusual look in her eyes that day. Not fear, not anger, something closer to concern. Some stories reveal themselves when the time is right, her mother had said. Until then, promise me you will trust your heart more than what people say about you. At the time, Claire had not understood. Years later, after her mother passed away, she searched for the journal again. It was gone. No one knew where it had gone. No one even remembered it existed. The mystery should have faded with time. Instead, it lingered. especially because of the bracelet. Her fingers brushed the silver links again. The same bracelet had been tucked inside that attic chest beside the journal. Her mother had given it to her on her 16th birthday with a simple instruction: never take it off. Claire had obeyed ever since. Not because she believed it was valuable, but because it was one of the few things she had left. Another wave of warmth pulsed against her wrist. Stronger this time. She froze. The sensation spread briefly up her arm before fading away. A chill followed. Her eyes dropped toward the bracelet. For a fraction of a second, tiny symbols seemed to shimmer across the silver surface like moonlight dancing on water. Then they vanished. Claire blinked. The metal looked completely ordinary again. Around her, the hall remained unchanged. No one else appeared to notice anything unusual. She released a slow breath. Perhaps the stress of the evening was finally catching up with her. Yet deep down, she knew that explanation felt wrong. Across the room, a group of elderly council members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a gray-haired woman wearing ceremonial robes embroidered with ancient runes, suddenly turned her head. Her eyes landed directly on Claire. The woman frowned, not with disapproval, with recognition. The moment lasted only a second before someone spoke to her, and she looked away. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Recognition was impossible. They had never met. Still, the strange feeling remained, like pieces of a puzzle shifting into place somewhere beyond her sight. Then Alpha King Lucien stepped forward to address the court. His voice had not yet filled the hall, but the atmosphere changed instantly. Hundreds of conversations died before they could begin. Every noble sat straighter. Every breath seemed measured. Claire lifted her eyes toward the platform once more. And for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly felt as though the life she had known until this moment was quietly approaching its end. As Alpha King Lucien stood before the court, the vast chamber seemed to shrink around Claire. The chandeliers still glowed. The musicians still waited along the balcony. Hundreds of nobles still filled the marble hall. Yet all of it felt strangely distant, as though she were hearing the evening through a closed door. The unease that had followed her throughout the night was not new. In truth, it had begun the evening before. Claire remembered standing alone beside the window of her modest guest room in the eastern wing of the palace. Moonlight had spilled across the floorboards while the kingdom prepared for the ceremony below. She had not expected an invitation to the gathering at all. Families like hers rarely received such honors anymore. The invitation had arrived without explanation, sealed with the royal crest, and delivered by a palace courier who offered no answers. That alone had been unusual. More unusual was the visitor who appeared shortly after sunset. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, her father's older sister, had arrived unexpectedly at her room. Claire had not seen her aunt in nearly 5 years. Time had silvered Eleanor's hair, but her sharp gray eyes remained unchanged. She had entered quietly, carrying a small wooden box. For several moments, she had simply studied Claire as though searching for something. Then she placed the box on the table. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Eleanor had said softly, "remember who you are." Claire had laughed nervously. That seems unlikely to become important. But her aunt had not smiled. "You have spent too many years believing what other people told you about yourself." There had been sadness in her voice. Sadness and something else. Regret. Before Claire could ask questions, Eleanor opened the box. Inside rested a folded piece of parchment so old that its edges had begun to fade. "This belonged to your mother," Eleanor explained. "She wanted you to have it when the time was right." Claire carefully unfolded the parchment. Most of the writing had disappeared with age, but one sentence remained clear. She remembered reading it twice, then 3 times. "Children of the moon crown shall remain hidden until the stars call them home." "What does that mean?" Claire had asked. Eleanor looked away toward the moonlit window. "Your mother believed some answers arrive only when people are ready to hear them." It was nearly the same thing her mother used to say. The similarity had unsettled her. "You are not making sense," Claire whispered. "Then perhaps tomorrow will." That was all Eleanor would say. She left soon afterward, taking the box with her and leaving behind more questions than answers. Claire had barely slept. And now, standing inside the Grand Moon Hall, she found herself thinking about those words again. "Children of the moon crown." The phrase echoed through her mind. Across the chamber, the elderly councilwoman she had noticed earlier was still watching her. This time there was no mistake. Their eyes met briefly. The woman's expression tightened. Not with confusion, with certainty, a certainty that made Claire's pulse quicken. Then the royal herald stepped forward and struck the marble floor once with a silver staff. The sound echoed through the hall. Every conversation ceased. Every eye turned toward the platform. And for the first time that evening, Claire felt absolutely certain of one thing. The answers she had been missing for years were closer than ever before. The royal herald lowered the silver staff and stepped aside. A hush settled across the Grand Moon Hall, so complete that Claire could hear the faint crackle of candle flames high above the chandeliers. Moonlight streamed through towering arched windows, washing the marble floor in pale silver and turning the entire chamber into something that felt suspended between dream and reality. The kingdom's most powerful families sat motionless beneath banners embroidered with ancient wolves and crescent moons. Jewel-toned gowns shimmered. Medals glinted on formal jackets. Every face carried the same expression: anticipation. The selection ceremony had begun. Claire remained near the pillar where she had spent most of the evening. She should have felt invisible there. Instead, the strange sensation from her bracelet lingered beneath her skin like a quiet heartbeat. She folded her hands together and focused on breathing steadily. Around her, whispers rose and faded. Names drifted through the crowd: Lady Victoria Ashcombe, Lady Isabella Rowan, Lady Charlotte Blackthorne. Women whose families had wealth, influence, and connections stretching across the kingdom. Women everyone expected to matter. Claire barely noticed the conversations. Her attention kept returning to the royal platform. Alpha King Lucien stood beneath the carved emblem of the moon crown. The silver wolf above him seemed almost alive in the candlelight. His expression revealed nothing. Calm, controlled, unreadable. Yet there was something unusual in the way his gaze moved across the hall. He was not searching. He was studying, as though he expected to find something no one else could see. Claire suddenly remembered another detail from the parchment her aunt had shown her. At the bottom corner, nearly erased by age, had been a symbol: a crescent moon wrapped around a crown of stars. The exact same symbol carved above the throne. Her pulse stumbled. That could not be a coincidence. Before she could think further, the councilwoman she had noticed earlier rose from her seat among the elders. The woman leaned toward a white-haired advisor beside her and whispered something urgently. The advisor followed her gaze across the hall, directly toward Claire. A knot tightened in Claire's stomach. Why were they watching her? She looked away first. The attention felt wrong. Impossible. She was nobody. A forgotten omega from a declining family. Nothing more. The musicians on the balcony began a slow ceremonial melody. The notes drifted through the chamber like mist across a lake. Servants opened the central aisle leading toward the platform. Several noble women straightened immediately, hope brightening their expressions. Some exchanged excited smiles. Others adjusted jewelry or smoothed elegant sleeves. The entire kingdom seemed to lean forward at once. Claire remained still. She had no expectations, no dreams of crowns or destiny. Life had taught her not to build castles out of impossible wishes. Yet the feeling inside her refused to disappear. Something was changing. Not in the hall. Not among the nobles. Inside her, like a locked door slowly beginning to open. Then Alpha King Lucien stepped forward to the edge of the platform. The music faded. Every eye turned toward him. Every breath paused. And when his silver gaze swept across the chamber one final time, it stopped for the briefest moment exactly where Claire Whitmore stood. The moment stretched like a thread pulled tight across the entire hall. Claire could not explain why her breath caught when Alpha King Lucien's eyes paused on her. Logic told her it meant nothing. Kings looked at hundreds of faces during ceremonies. Yet something about that brief glance felt deliberate, measured, as if he were comparing what he saw against a memory only he possessed. Then his attention shifted, and the spell broke. Claire released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The royal herald stepped forward once more. "By decree of the moon crown," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "The selection ceremony shall proceed according to the ancient customs of the Northern Territories." A murmur rippled through the crowd before fading into silence again. Everyone knew the customs. Every noble child learned them from an early age. The Alpha King would review the eligible candidates presented before the court. Families would be recognized, alliances considered, traditions honored. Tonight would shape the future of the kingdom. The first names were called. One by one, Young women approached the center aisle while attendants announced their family histories and accomplishments. Applause followed each presentation. Some received warm smiles from the audience. Others earned approving nods from influential nobles. Claire watched quietly from the edge of the hall. She expected to feel detached, but the atmosphere carried a strange intensity. Hope flickered in countless eyes. Ambition hid behind polished manners. Every candidate carried the weight of expectations far larger than herself. Lady Victoria Ashcombe received the loudest response. As she crossed the marble floor, confidence seemed to follow her like a second shadow. Her sapphire gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Noble families exchanged satisfied smiles. Several council members whispered approvingly. Everything about the moment felt inevitable. Claire understood why everyone believed Victoria would be chosen. She represented stability, influence, and prestige. She belonged to the future people expected. Yet while the court admired Victoria, Claire noticed something unusual. Lucien remained perfectly composed. No smile touched his face. No spark of interest appeared in his silver eyes. He listened politely. Nothing more. The realization unsettled her. Because for the first time all evening, the outcome seemed less certain than everyone assumed. Another candidate stepped forward. Then another. The ceremony continued. Time blurred. Names echoed through the hall, while moonlight slowly shifted across the polished floor. Claire tried focusing on the presentations, but the strange warmth returned to her bracelet. Stronger than before. The silver links felt almost alive against her skin. She lowered her gaze. Tiny lines of light flickered beneath the surface of the metal before fading. Her pulse quickened. This time she knew she had not imagined it. At the same instant, a faint gasp came from somewhere nearby. Claire looked up. The elderly councilwoman was staring directly at her wrist. Shock flashed across the woman's face before she quickly concealed it. Claire's stomach tightened. The woman had seen it too. Before she could react, a palace attendant approached from the side aisle. He moved quickly but respectfully. When he stopped beside Claire, confusion swept through her. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "His Majesty requests your presence closer to the platform." For a second, Claire simply stared at him. Around them, several nearby nobles turned to listen. Surprise spread through their expressions. Claire felt every eye suddenly shift toward her. The attendant bowed his head slightly. "If you would please follow me." And as silence slowly spread through the nearest rows, Claire realized the evening was no longer unfolding the way anyone expected. The walk from the shadowed pillar to the front of the hall felt far longer than it should have. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes following her every step across the marble floor. Whispers spread through the chamber like wind through dry leaves. Some voices carried surprise. Others carried amusement. A few carried open disbelief. Claire kept her gaze forward. Her mother had once told her that dignity was not something people gave you. It was something you chose to keep. Tonight, she held on to that lesson with both hands. The palace attendant guided her to a position near the base of the platform before stepping away. Suddenly, there was nowhere to hide. The chandeliers blazed overhead. Moonlight poured through the windows. The entire court could see her clearly now. She heard someone quietly laugh from the noble section. Another voice muttered that there must have been some mistake. Claire ignored them. Her pulse was steady, strangely steady, as if some deeper part of her already knew this moment had been waiting for her all along. Above her, Alpha King Lucien regarded her with the same unreadable expression he had worn all evening. The silence stretched. Then the royal herald unrolled a scroll and cleared his throat. "Claire Whitmore of House Whitmore," he announced. The words echoed across the hall. More whispers followed. The name carried little influence now. Many younger nobles had probably never heard it before tonight. Claire lifted her chin slightly. The bracelet on her wrist felt warm again, though she no longer dared look at it. The herald glanced toward the king. Lucien stepped forward. Every sound vanished. Even the musicians seemed afraid to breathe. His silver eyes rested on Claire. "You stand before this court as a candidate presented under the ancient customs of the moon crown." His voice was calm and powerful without effort. "The traditions of this kingdom grant me the right to accept or decline any proposed match." Claire nodded once. She knew the law. Everyone did. Yet a strange sadness passed through the room before the decision was even spoken. Perhaps because everyone already believed they knew what was coming. Lucien's gaze never left hers. "Claire Whitmore," he said, "I decline your candidacy." For a heartbeat, Absolute silence followed. Then the hall erupted with reaction. Some nobles exchanged knowing smiles. Others looked relieved. A few openly laughed. Lady Victoria lowered her eyes to hide her satisfaction. Several council members appeared uncomfortable, but none spoke. The decision itself was not shocking. To the court, it was simply the natural order of things being confirmed. Claire heard the whispers begin immediately. The forgotten Omega. The failed family. The predictable outcome. Yet while the voices swirled around her, something unexpected happened. The crushing humiliation everyone anticipated never arrived. She felt disappointment, certainly, but beneath it was something else. Clarity. A calm certainty she could not explain. Slowly, Claire lowered her gaze for a moment. Then she raised it again. The warmth in her bracelet pulsed once beneath her skin. Strong and steady. Around her, the laughter continued. The court believed the story had ended. They believed they had witnessed the final chapter of a forgotten woman's place in history. None of them realized they were only seconds away from hearing the words that would change everything. The laughter did not arrive all at once. It spread gradually through the hall, beginning with a few amused smiles before growing into a wave of whispered comments and satisfied expressions. Claire stood motionless at the foot of the platform while the sound washed around her. Years ago, she would have shrunk beneath that attention. Years ago, she might have lowered her eyes and wished the floor would swallow her whole. Tonight felt different. Perhaps it was because she had spent so much of her life being underestimated that another judgment no longer carried the same weight. Or perhaps it was because something inside her had quietly awakened. Near the front row, Lady Victoria exchanged a glance with one of her companions. The look was brief but unmistakable. Relief. Confidence. The certainty of someone who believed the path ahead had finally cleared. Several nobles resumed speaking as though the ceremony had already reached its conclusion. Others watched Claire with the detached curiosity reserved for forgotten stories. A young lord shook his head and laughed softly. "I told you she never belonged here." His companion nodded. "At least the evening can proceed properly now." Claire heard every word. She simply chose not to carry them. Above her, the council members sat in uneasy silence. The elderly councilwoman, who had been watching Claire throughout the evening, appeared troubled. Her gaze drifted repeatedly toward the bracelet on Claire's wrist. Twice she opened her mouth as if preparing to speak. Twice she remained silent. Whatever secret she knew seemed to be fighting its way toward the surface. The atmosphere shifted again when Claire noticed Alpha King Lucien. Unlike the others, he was not smiling. He was not celebrating. In fact, his expression had grown more distant than before. His silver eyes remained fixed on her with unsettling intensity, as though he were waiting for something. The realization sent a faint shiver through her. Waiting for what? The answer came from somewhere unexpected. The bracelet suddenly pulsed with warmth. Not a flicker, not a brief sensation. A steady current spread through the silver links and across her skin. Claire looked down instinctively. Tiny lines of light appeared beneath the metal's surface. Delicate, ancient, beautiful. For an instant, they formed symbols she almost recognized from the old parchment her aunt had shown her. Then the glow faded once more. Her heart raced. She knew now that none of this was coincidence. The invitation, the parchment, the councilwoman's reaction, the strange attention from the king. Invisible threads connected them all. Around her, the court continued its quiet mockery, unaware that anything unusual had happened. Yet Claire sensed a storm gathering beneath the surface of the evening. Not a storm of anger or conflict, a storm of truth, the kind that changed lives forever. She lifted her head and looked around the hall. Hundreds of faces stared back, some amused, some dismissive, some openly pleased by her humiliation. For the first time, Claire felt no urge to defend herself. Their opinions suddenly seemed very small compared to the questions unfolding inside her mind. A deep calm settled over her. The laughter began to fade. Conversation slowed. One by one, people noticed that Claire had not moved. She had not cried. She had not argued. She had not pleaded. She simply stood there with quiet dignity beneath the chandeliers. And as the hall gradually fell silent again, an uncomfortable realization spread through the crowd. The story they thought they were witnessing was not unfolding the way it was supposed to. Silence settled over the Grand Moon Hall with a weight that felt almost tangible. The laughter had faded completely now, leaving behind a strange tension that no one seemed able to explain. Claire stood exactly where she was, her shoulders relaxed, her hands resting lightly at her sides. The marble beneath her feet reflected the silver glow of moonlight pouring through the towering windows. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on her, waiting, watching, expecting. Yet the reaction they anticipated never came. She did not plead for reconsideration. She did not argue with the decision. She did not allow embarrassment to bend her posture or cloud her expression. Instead, she simply breathed. The calmness unsettled people more than tears ever could. Near the front row, several nobles exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly lord shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A young noblewoman lowered her fan and stared openly. Even Lady Victoria's confidence seemed less certain now. Something about Claire's composure refused to fit the role everyone had assigned to her. Above them, the chandeliers cast warm golden light across the chamber, but Claire felt oddly detached from the room. The whispers, the expectations, the judgment, they seemed farther away with every passing second. Her thoughts drifted instead to her mother. She remembered a rainy afternoon many years ago when she had returned home after being mocked by other children. She had locked herself in her room and cried until she had no tears left. Her mother had found her sitting beside the window. Instead of offering comfort, she had asked a question. Who decides your worth? Claire had been too upset to answer. Her mother had smiled gently and sat beside her. The day you let strangers answer that question for you is the day you hand them your future. At the time, Claire had not understood. Standing in the center of the kingdom's most powerful court, she finally did. A faint warmth spread through her bracelet once more. Not alarming, reassuring, like a hand resting lightly against hers. She looked down briefly. The silver links remained still, yet she could almost feel something awakening within them. Around the hall, the growing silence became impossible to ignore. People were beginning to realize that the moment was not over. The king had spoken, but somehow the evening felt unfinished. Claire slowly lifted her gaze toward the platform. Alpha King Lucien had not looked away. His silver eyes remained fixed on her, searching for something she could not name. The councilwoman was watching too. So were the advisors. So were the nobles. For the first time in years, Claire did not feel invisible. She felt seen. And strangely, that realization carried no fear. Only certainty. Whatever happened next would matter. The knowledge settled inside her like the final piece of a puzzle finding its place. She drew a slow breath. The hall remained utterly still. No music played. No voices interrupted. Even the servants along the walls seemed frozen in anticipation. The kingdom waited. Claire could feel it. They expected an apology, a protest, or perhaps a quiet retreat. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly higher, her expression calm beneath the moonlit glow, and prepared to speak. Claire could feel the weight of the entire kingdom pressing against the silence. The chandeliers glowed overhead. Moonlight painted silver patterns across the marble floor. Somewhere in the distance, a candle flickered softly, and the sound seemed impossibly loud inside the stillness. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting for her response. Claire folded her hands lightly before her and inclined her head toward the platform. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm enough that several people leaned forward just to hear it. "Your Majesty," she said. The words carried through the hall with surprising clarity. "I accept your decision." A ripple of approval moved through parts of the audience. Some nobles nodded as though the matter had finally been settled. Others relaxed into their seats. They believed the evening was returning to its expected course. Claire allowed the silence to linger for another heartbeat. Then she lifted her eyes to meet Lucien's gaze. Because no crown has the power to determine a person's worth. The effect was immediate. The approval vanished. Several nobles straightened abruptly. Conversations that had begun to restart died once more. Claire continued before anyone could interrupt. A title can open doors. Wealth can influence opinions. Status can shape expectations. But none of those things create value. They only reveal what people choose to worship. The hall seemed to grow quieter with every word. Claire was not speaking with anger. That was what unsettled them most. There was no bitterness in her voice. No accusation. Only truth spoken without fear. "For years," she said softly, "I believed the opinions of others were a measure of who I was. When my family lost its standing, people treated us differently. Friends disappeared. Invitations stopped arriving. Doors quietly closed. I thought those losses changed my value. Her fingers brushed the silver bracelet resting against her wrist. I was wrong. Across the room, several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided looking at her altogether. Claire could see realization moving through the crowd. Not agreement. Recognition. They understood exactly what she meant because many of them had participated in it. Worth is not granted by a court, she continued. It is not bestowed by applause. It does not disappear when fortunes change. And it certainly does not depend upon whether a king chooses to stand beside someone. A stunned silence followed. The words seemed to hang in the air long after she finished speaking them. Claire's pulse remained steady. The fear she expected never arrived. Instead, she felt lighter with every sentence, as though she were finally speaking truths she had carried for years. Then she offered a small, respectful bow. So I accept your decision with gratitude, Your Majesty, not because it defines me, but because it does not. The silence that followed felt different from all the others that evening. It was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of people confronting something they had not expected to hear. Even Lady Victoria looked shaken. The elderly councilwoman pressed a hand against her chest. Several advisors exchanged alarmed glances. And high above them all, beneath the symbol of the moon crown, Alpha King Lucien Ashford remained completely still. Yet for the first time that night, something had changed in his expression. The distant certainty was gone. In its place appeared something far more dangerous. Doubt. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The silence that followed Claire's words seemed to stretch across the entire Grand Moon Hall, touching every noble, every advisor, every servant standing quietly along the walls. It was the kind of silence that appeared only when something fundamental had shifted. Claire remained where she was, her posture calm beneath the glow of the chandeliers. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even regret. Instead, she felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Whatever happened next, she had spoken honestly. That alone felt like freedom. Then the warmth in her bracelet returned, stronger than ever before. Claire looked down instinctively. This time the silver links did not merely shimmer. Delicate lines of pale light moved beneath the surface like moonlight flowing through water. A collective gasp rippled through the nearest rows. People had seen it. Claire's breath caught. The ancient symbols appeared again, clearer now than they had ever been. Tiny crescent shapes intertwined with stars. Patterns she recognized from the parchment her aunt had shown her. Patterns that matched the emblem carved above the royal throne. The elderly councilwoman rose so abruptly that her chair scraped against the marble floor. Every head turned toward her. Her face had gone pale. "It cannot be," she whispered. Yet the words carried through the silent chamber. Beside her, several advisors stood as well. Their eyes remained fixed on Claire's wrist. Confusion spread through the crowd. Nobles exchanged uncertain glances. Whispers returned, but these whispers carried concern rather than mockery. Claire looked from the bracelet to the council members. "What is happening?" she asked softly. No one answered immediately. Then the councilwoman slowly descended the steps from the platform. The movement alone shocked the court. Few people of her rank ever left their seats during a royal ceremony. When she finally stopped a few feet away from Claire, emotion trembled behind her composed expression. "May I see your bracelet?" she asked. Claire hesitated only briefly before extending her arm. The older woman studied the silver links with eyes that seemed suddenly filled with decades of forgotten memories. When she finally looked up, there was unmistakable awe in her gaze. "The moon-crowned sigil," she whispered. "After all these years." The word struck the court like a stone dropped into still water. Several nobles frowned in confusion. Others looked genuinely alarmed. Claire felt her pulse quicken. She had never heard the term before. Yet something about it stirred a distant recognition deep within her. The councilwoman turned toward the platform. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "there is something you must know." Alpha King Lucien remained motionless for a moment. Then he descended the marble steps himself. The entire hall watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the kingdom approached the woman he had just dismissed. When he stopped before Claire, his silver eyes settled on the glowing bracelet. The certainty he had carried throughout the evening was gone completely now. In its place stood a question. And as moonlight spilled through the towering windows behind them, Claire realized that the answers she had been searching for her entire life were finally beginning to emerge from the shadows. The Grand Moon Hall no longer felt like the same place it had been an hour earlier. The laughter was gone. The certainty was gone. Even the confidence that had filled the chamber at the beginning of the ceremony seemed to have dissolved beneath the weight of revelation. Claire stood quietly as the pale symbols continued to glow beneath the silver links of her bracelet. Their light was gentle, yet impossible to ignore. Every face in the court reflected it. Every eye followed it. The elderly councilwoman drew a slow breath before turning toward the assembled nobles. The moon-crowned sigil was thought lost nearly 3 generations ago, she said. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. According to the oldest records, it belonged to a bloodline entrusted with protecting the founding covenant of this kingdom. Murmurs swept through the hall. Several advisors exchanged startled looks. Others appeared confused. The councilwoman continued. The bloodline vanished after the Great Separation. Historians believed it ended completely. Claire listened carefully, struggling to understand how any of this connected to her. Her heart beat steadily against her ribs. Somewhere deep inside, pieces of forgotten memories seemed to be stirring. Her mother's gentle smile, the hidden journal, the mysterious parchment, the instructions never to remove the bracelet. None of it felt random anymore. Alpha King Lucien stepped closer. The distance between them was now only a few feet. His attention remained fixed on the bracelet. "You are certain?" he asked quietly. The councilwoman nodded. "I have spent 40 years studying royal archives. I have never seen the sigil appear on anyone else." The room grew still once more. Then one of the senior advisors spoke. "If that is true, then Miss Whitmore is not merely the daughter of a forgotten family." The implication hung in the air before anyone dared finish it. Claire felt the warmth in the bracelet pulse again. Stronger, brighter. For a brief moment, the symbols expanded across the silver surface, revealing a complete crest. A crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Several nobles rose from their seats without realizing they had done so. The councilwoman lowered her head respectfully. "The line of the moon crown has returned." The words struck the hall with more force than any announcement made that evening. Claire blinked. Returned. The words seemed impossible. She had spent her life believing she came from a family everyone had forgotten. Yet now the kingdom's oldest scholars were speaking about her as though she belonged to its oldest history. Across the chamber, Lady Victoria looked stunned. The nobles who had mocked Claire earlier suddenly seemed unsure where to look. Their confidence had evaporated. Their assumptions had collapsed beneath them. Claire should have felt triumphant. She did not. Instead, she felt humbled by the realization that her mother had known far more than she ever revealed. Alpha King Lucien finally lifted his gaze from the bracelet and looked directly into Claire's eyes. For the first time that evening, there was no distance between them. No royal formality. No judgment. Only understanding. "You stood before this court believing you had nothing to prove," he said quietly. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. "Because I did not." A faint smile touched the corner of the councilwoman's mouth. Several advisors nodded. The answer seemed to confirm something they had only begun to suspect. Claire's worth had never depended on titles. That was why she had been worthy of them all along. Beyond the tall windows, moonlight poured across the kingdom like silver rain. And as the ancient crest continued to glow softly upon her wrist, Claire realized that the life she thought she had lost was only the beginning of the story destiny had been writing for her all along. No one in the Grand Moon Hall seemed willing to move. The ceremony that had begun with confidence and certainty now stood suspended beneath 1,000 unanswered questions. Moonlight streamed through the towering windows, casting silver across the marble floor where Claire Whitmore remained at the center of the kingdom's attention. Yet the feeling that filled her was not triumph. It was gratitude. Gratitude for her mother. Gratitude for the lessons that had carried her through years of being overlooked. Gratitude that she had learned her worth before anyone else tried to define it for her. The ancient symbols on her bracelet gradually dimmed until only a faint silver glow remained. Even so, the atmosphere in the hall had changed forever. Nobles who had ignored her now watched with careful respect. Advisors whispered urgently among themselves. The councilwoman stood quietly nearby, her expression filled with wonder. History had returned in a form no one expected. Claire looked around the chamber one final time. The marble columns, the chandeliers, the banners embroidered with wolves and moons. Earlier that evening, every part of the hall had felt intimidating. Now it simply felt human. Beautiful, certainly. Powerful, perhaps, but no longer capable of deciding who she was. She drew a slow breath and turned toward the main aisle. The ceremony was over. Whatever came next belonged to another chapter. The crowd parted almost immediately, creating a clear path between her and the towering doors at the far end of the hall. The gesture was subtle, yet impossible to miss. Respect had replaced judgment. Claire began walking. Her steps echoed softly against the polished marble. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. For the first time all evening, silence followed her, not because she was forgotten, but because she was understood. Halfway down the aisle, a voice broke the stillness. "Claire." She stopped. Every person in the hall froze once more. Slowly, she turned. Alpha King Lucien Ashford stood near the base of the platform. Moonlight traced silver along the edges of his dark, formal coat. His expression carried none of the certainty that had marked him at the beginning of the ceremony. Instead, there was honesty, perhaps even humility, the kind that only appeared after a person discovered they had misunderstood something important. Claire met his gaze across the distance. Neither of them spoke immediately. The moment stretched. Around them, the kingdom watched. Lucien took a single step forward, then another, not as a king approaching a subject, as a man approaching a woman whose strength had forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew. "There is something I would like to understand," he said quietly. Claire felt a small smile touch her lips. "Then perhaps," she replied, "you should begin by asking questions instead of making decisions." A few startled breaths sounded throughout the hall. Then, unexpectedly, the corners of Lucien's mouth lifted into the faintest smile. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from him that evening. The councilwoman closed her eyes briefly as though witnessing the fulfillment of an old prophecy. Claire held Lucien's gaze for one final moment before turning back toward the doors. This time she continued walking. No one tried to stop her. Behind her, the kingdom remained silent. Ahead of her, moonlight spilled across the palace courtyard like a path waiting to be followed. And somewhere beyond the walls of the palace, beyond the expectations of nobles and the weight of ancient history, destiny quietly smiled. Because the most important part of the story had not been the revelation of who Claire was. It was the fact that she had discovered it long before anyone else did.